Exchange sacrifices are one of the most difficult parts of chess. They're hard to evaluate, and the compensation can be many moves in the future. So here are 3 exchange sacrifices from the master himself, Petrosian. We'll see stunning moves like rook e6, where black gives up his rook for a bishop to halt white's pawn centre, and rook h3, where white gives up this rook on f1, risks everything for a kingside attack. Now in this position, black is in dire trouble. White's got a very mobile pawn centre with these 2 pawns. Black's not got adequate control over this square or this square, so white's threatening moves like bishop f3 and d5, gaining time on black's knight. He'll then be playing d6 or even e6, pushing these rooks around. If black moves his rook off the e-file, white will be crashing through with e6. Black can capture, white will recapture with the rook, and then his double rooks from the same file as the queen. So black needs to block this d5 square ASAP, but the only way to do this is to get his rook out of the way, put his knight on e7 and then into d5. Then white would be forced to trade off this light squared bishop for that knight if he wanted to make progress. However, black's only got 1 move and white's got 2 threats. He can either prevent this move e6 for white, or he can get his rook out of the way, get his knight into d5. Meanwhile, white will play bishop f3, d5 and steamroll black. So there's only 1 move that can stop both those threats, and that's the amazing sacrifice rook e6. Now if white captures, black recaptures. Black's knight can circulate around d5, completely blocking white's pawn chain. White's rooks are almost useless because they've only got this 1 file to attack down, and black can easily cover it with his minor pieces. Meanwhile, black's bishop will be coming into this fantastic outpost d3, preventing the rook coming to f1. White's counterpart for this bishop is this terrible bishop on b2. It's got no future on this diagonal. The only way to activate it would be to sacrifice a pawn with a4 and then let it come to a3. And again, since black's not got 2 rooks to double up anyway, white's control of this f8 square is almost irrelevant. So a fantastic positional turnaround for black. The only way for white to carry on in this position with an advantage is the move h4, actually rejecting this sacrifice, saying, okay, you've blocked the centre, I'm going to go for a kingside attack now. So black carries on with his plan, knight e7. Now white can capture on e6 and go rook g3. White's plan is to go with moves like queen g5, h5 and go for mate on g7. This step will tie this bishop down, or this queen, basically trying to prevent the checkmate on g7. Meanwhile, white will be activating his rook and his bishop with moves like a4, bishop a3. So the only way black can counter this is by playing himself on the queen side with bishop d3, queen g4, queen f7. Now if h5, we can block the f-file with knight f5. And the only way for white to get rid of this fantastic bishop is to sacrifice his rook back with rook takes d3. Now, bear in mind, this game was played between Reshevsky and Petrosian, 2 great Soviet grandmasters, and Reshevsky actually got it wrong. He played a4 here. Now, this gave Petrosian the chance to carry out his plan and move faster without this kingside attack. So, if black was to fall for this b4 move, then white would have a very good position, because he'd again be going for bishop f3 and d5. Instead, black went knight e7, not falling for it, bishop takes e6, f takes e6. Now, black's position is much better because this centre's blocked. White can go queen f1 and rook f3, doubling up on the d-file, but again, black's pieces are flowing into their optimal squares. The bishop and the knight can develop immediately, the queen can come to e7, the rook can come to f8. Meanwhile, white's b5 pawn is not really a threat. Black can keep it under control with his major and minor pieces. So let's see what happened. So queen f1, knight d5, rook f3, bishop d3. Now the only move for white to keep the balance here is quite surprising. See if you can find it. It's actually rook takes d3, leading to an equal endgame. If white went queen f2, black would be threatening b4. Now he is attacking this pawn twice, he's also threatening queen takes a4. So after queen d2, queen a4, now black's got a pawn and a good minor piece for the rook, and he'd be threatening to steamroll on the queen side with these two passed pawns. So very dangerous for white. So he's forced to give back the material. Black recaptures, queen recaptures, b4, takes. Now black's a pawn down, but he's got compensation. This pawn's weak. This extra pawn's not doing anything because this knight's not going to move. So both players played on a few moves and agreed to draw here. So a great positional exchange sacrifice from Petrosian. Now in this game we have Petrosian playing as white again. White would like to go for a kingside attack here with moves like rook g3, knight e3 to f5 hitting this bishop. He'd also like to bring his queen into the attack, and the move f4 is in the air too because he's hitting this knight on e5. He's not got a lot of time to do this though because black's already got one threat, taking on f1, and he's thinking of going with moves like f5 and bringing his queen out to f6. He can also go b5 to open up the queen side. Now, white has a choice. Black is attacking this rook on f1, so white could move the rook to e1, but then the move f5 is very strong. White can't take because if he takes, then knight c4 is a very strong threat, and this is just an equal position. White, this rook on e1 is hanging, and it would be mate in 1 if black took it, so white has to go rook takes e8, queen takes e8. Now black is threatening queen e1 and taking on d2, after which black would have the double bishops and dominate the centre because they'd both be pointing inwards. So white instead went for the exchange sacrifice with the move rook h3. Now black actually took on f1 here, but it wasn't the best move. Again, the best move is to decline the exchange sacrifice with h4, blocking this rook, giving time for black to bring forces to defend the kingside. White could carry on his plan with knight e3. Black now has the move bishop d3, now that the rook is not covering this square. Queen d1. Now you can take the rook on f1, but black has enough time to get the knight to d3, exchange off this bishop, after which he can put the rook on e5 and the queen on f6, covering the kingside. However, Reshevsky, the person playing black, didn't do this, so he instead went bishop takes f1, knight takes f1, and black went b5. Again, not such a good move. The best move here was to open up the kingside and plug this hole on f5 by playing f5 himself. White can go knight g3 hitting it, we take on e4, knight takes h5, and we have a mess on the king side. We're going to throw pieces in front of our king just to block up this file and prevent checkmate. So we'll play moves like knight g6, knight takes g7, king g7. Now white can go for bishop d2, c3, rook g3, and as you can see, the computer gives white a large advantage. But it's hard to prove that black has opportunities to counter-attack on the king side with rook g8, king back to g8, maybe queen to f6 if it's possible. So a murky position. This is what black should have gone for. Instead he went for b5, which is a poor move because it doesn't defend the king side. White goes knight d3. Black again wastes a move with b takes a4. White continues knight f5, and here black tries to throw the knight in front of the king. Now this doesn't really work because white is building up with rook takes h5, black went bishop e5, but white's planning g3 and f4. He's going to bring his knight out to e3, and then once this knight's on e3 it can hit some juicy squares. It can go g4 and h6 even. White can also bring his queen into the game this way, and black really has no way to defend this pawn because these rooks have no activity. This queen could potentially come to f6, but to cover h7 it'd have to go back to h8. So white executes the kingside attack, eventually won this game. Here, Petrosian, playing as black this time, has a completely crushing position. He's got two rooks on the g-file looking at white's king, he's got this mobile h-pawn double, and his king is perfectly safe. He has long-term plans of knight b8 and c6, his bishop will come out to e7, defend this pawn, but black really lacks a knockout blow. White is threatening this rook on g4, so if black was to play something boring, like rook g6, white could take on h5, or he could play a bit more slowly with knight f3 and support this weak pawn on e5. Now, black really has no more ways to attack this pawn. If he plays bishop g7, white will counter with queen d4, and the kingside attack is stymied, because if black goes h3, white can either take, and this rook is perfectly protected, or he could just go for g3 and have this pawn on h3 as an umbrella pawn. Now, the computer gives -2 for black, but could you convert that? Would it be easy? You could make inaccuracies and it can end up being a draw. So, Petrosian played a much more interesting move, which was knight takes e5. This gives up the rook on g4, which white duly accepted with knight takes g4, h takes g4. And now look at this position. White's strong central pawn on e5 has disappeared, which means these pawns are now mobile. He's also undoubled his pawn mass, so he's got more of a King's Indian type kingside attack. He's threatening g3 to open the h-file up and get at white's king. He can go bishop to d6 to unpin this knight from the queen. Meanwhile, white's rooks are completely inactive, so he might be up a rook for the knight, but how's he going to use it? Because this rook is looking at a pawn which is fully defended. So white, Spassky this time, very strong player, tries to muddy the waters, which is the right decision when you're worse. He played e4. Now this creates a square for the queen on e3. The queen can then come into the position with queen b6. Black went bishop d6. Again, this pawn's adequately protected. Queen e3 and g3. Now white of course can't take this pawn because this would be suicide on the h-file. So he goes f3. Now we've got a litany of tactics to open up this position. Black could have gone knight g4 here, f takes g4, and now bishop takes f4. If white goes something like queen to c5, trying to get the queens off, we can oblige him. Queen takes, b takes. Now if we go d4 ourselves, that unblocks the bishop attack on the pawn. White might go d takes, c takes d4, and we take on e4 with a completely crushing endgame, despite still being down in exchange, because these pawns are going to promote. Now, Petrosian didn't deliver the knockout blow so quickly, though he did win. I still think, even though black was better in the initial position, if he hadn't sacrificed the exchange, I still think this is a great example of how to use the exchange sacrifice to turn a murky position where you're better into a clear winning position that will give you the full point.